Oklahoma fans, consider this our way too early pregame, early in the day preview show of the Alamo Bowl between Oklahoma and Oregon, but also consider that between now and 9:15 Eastern, 8:15 Central Time, who knows what's going to change in regards to the landscape of this football game with personnel moves and everything that's among the moving parts. We got Jason Reyes, we always do, from Last Word on College Football to help us break it all down on our 37th edition of Oklahoma Sooners Live. So we do this every Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. So we hope you will make this a part of your Wednesday each and every week. Jason, how you doing today?
Doing good, Mark. I think traditionally, looking at this just in terms of the time frame in which the game is scheduled to kick off, I think typically if you're within 24 hours, you feel safe. However, after last night's Holiday Bowl getting canceled a mere 5 hours before the kickoff, it's I think a lot of us are just kind of sitting and hoping for the best, hoping that the game actually gets played. There's been so many the bowl games, both seasons kind of been disrupted by all the cancellations, but hopefully this one will still get played.
So, folks, consider this, that as of just 3, 4, 5 years ago, the only opt-outs that you would ever hear of, well, going back 10 or 15 years, you would never hear of anybody opting out of a bowl game. And then you had to be the level of a Christian McCaffrey or Leonard Fournette to opt out of a bowl game and be a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. And that was 6, 7, 8 years ago. Okay. Now we understand and see that if you are the status of an Oklahoma, then you're going to have 4, 5, 6 opt-outs, most likely. And we are starting to see that more in bowl season over the past couple of days because the more prominent teams are starting to play with more NFL draft eligible players. Okay, so we've got that. We've got opt-outs at a higher rate than ever before. Number 2, we've got the transfer portal that is humming each and every day. And even though it simmers down around this time because players would generally make a commitment to their team through the end of the season or not, generally, we are seeing unprecedented decisions made by players and teams to play in a bowl game under the conditions that they're transferring, and everybody knows they're transferring and leaving the program. The case in point, Emory Jones at Florida saying, I'm going to finish out the season with my team, with Florida, but I'm in the transfer portal, and everybody knows he's not going to be a Florida Gator. This is unprecedented, where players are somewhat free agents, and this isn't common yet, but we're seeing it with a few other players as well, where we know that they are transferring, but they are going to, based on their desire and the team's desire for them to finish out the season and play the final game, the bowl game, with their current team, they are playing, even though we know they're going to be with somebody else in 2022. Then we have players who are transferring and therefore are separating immediately from their current team and not playing with their current team. And then on top of all that, of course, we are still in a COVID situation where players, unfortunately, are being ruled inactive at any point. And we saw the most extreme case, Jason, as we were discussing before we started to record here last night at the Holiday Bowl in San Diego, where UCLA, just hours before kickoff, was ruled to be ineligible, decided that they did not have enough players to participate, and NC State was left hanging, and the Holiday Bowl canceled within hours of kickoff. And this is the state of college football, Jason.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate, Mark. I mean, I'm with you. I enjoy the bowl season, very much, but I think it's getting to the point where, number one, there's so many bowl games. I think there's 41, 42, somewhere in that neighborhood, of bowl games, and it's becoming, this year specifically, it's becoming one of those things where just kind of waiting to see whether or not they get played or not. But overall, kind of looking at it, it's a problem. I think it's a big problem for college football in the bowl season. No matter which way you want to slice it, whether you're talking about players transferring, you have opt outs, you have injuries, or play like you said with Emory Jones, just really kind of had literally 1 foot in the door, 1 foot out the door. I don't, and I don't know what the solution is. Like I believe Oklahoma has either 4 or 5 opt outs in this game themselves, and quite frankly, they're not. I mean, they're not high draft picks, but I think the potentially probably second, third round guys for the most part, but at the highest. But I think you're looking at kids these days that for whatever reason they don't want to risk injury in one final game, however many 10, 12 practices that they have between the end of the year and then their bowl game, unless it's a college football playoff game. So I don't know I've listened to a lot of people, and then watching some of these games, listening to the broadcast. It's something that's brought up every single game. It seems to be, and there are certain people that have thoughts whether or not does an expanded playoff help this situation. Does somehow within the rules and the guidelines of NIL, does some of these players allowed to get some sort of compensation for playing in the game, which I don't know if they're a high draft pick. I don't know whether it would matter, based on the contract that they would get at the next level. But it's something that needs to be addressed at some point, because it's certainly watering down the bowl season, and it's making it not as. And obviously, we know that the pandemic thing is probably is something that's obviously not going to be as prevalent in future years. You would hope. That it is right now, but I think at the same time, it's something that really needs to be addressed in our game, and I think a lot of it kind of speaks to the lack of leadership at the NCAA level that we're seeing right now. And then I think it's a problem. I mean, I don't know that there's one specific solution that you could say. Maybe it's a a 3-pronged approach, or if it's a multiple type of a situation that gets this back to where we have enjoyed. And again, the bowl season is still fun, but I think at the same time, it's so hard to know what kind of a team that they're going to have on the field from the last game to this bowl game.
College football has developed and progressed through the decades to become a national sport by being a regional sport that kind of morphs together, and all the regions, when you put the fabric together, it becomes a national sport with national interest. But it's regionalized in the way it's structured, and that probably hurts it in this situation, to your point. And we saw that during the 2020 season with the pandemic, where the conferences, they own themselves, dictate their own rules, their own conditions, their own guidelines, and then they try to work together where they have to regarding scheduling, bowls, whatever connections they have in which they have to agree. But otherwise, they do whatever they want, and the NCAA doesn't really involve itself, or does not wield the type of power that it does. It has become almost kind of a governing body of just allegations and infractions and penalties dealing with that. But everything else, the conferences just kind of do whatever they want and are autonomous and try to work together. But if they don't, they don't. And you mentioned there being too many bowl games, and I understand that comment. I argue in a sense both sides, because do I believe that 5 and 7 and even 6-6 teams really should be rewarded with postseason play, because you connect postseason play with teams that are winning teams. And so my answer would be no, that they really didn't earn a bowl trip or a postseason game. But at the same time, I'll take as many football games as we can get. And if people don't like the football games, they don't have to watch the football games. I'm watching the Minnesota West Virginia game last night. That is the first rate guaranteed bowl, whatever it is, first rate insurance bowl, whatever it was, guaranteed rate insurance bowl. And what struck me funny, and it resonated when you just stated about there being too many bowl games, is that they were showing, they were coming back from break and they were showing the various MVPs of this bowl game, Well, for one thing, the first rate guaranteed insurance bowl, whatever it is, it's only existed 1 year. Basically, this has been a bowl game of like a dozen different sponsors and names and even locations over the years. So I don't even know if you can call it the same bowl game. They're making comments about bowl history, this bowl's history, and I look it up because I'm kind of piecing it together in my mind, and I'm pretty good when it comes to tracking bowl games and knowing what bowl games have been around for how long and what conferences are involved. And I could do that in my brain, but then I looked it up just to make it official and go through the years. And this bowl game's been around since 1989. It's been the Copper Bowl, the Arizona Bowl, the Cactus Bowl, the Insight.com Bowl, the Insight Bowl, the Buffalo Wild Wings Bowl. And it's been played in Tucson and Phoenix and Tempe. And is that the same bowl game?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Oh, at the same bowl game. So it's just kind of ludicrous, all of it. And again, hey, Minnesota and West Virginia, hey, if those two teams are going to play, I'm going to watch the game if I'm available and enjoy the game. So I don't mind it, but it's all pretty ludicrous. And now we've got two name brand programs playing tonight, Jason, that we really don't know what kind of product we're going to get on the field. We were having a discussion before we came on about just isolating Oregon's personnel situation with a different coaching staff, different head coach. Their head coach is off to Miami, and their best players opting out, and us not really having a good take on their backups and their personnel. And then you bring the COVID situation into it, and Oklahoma's another version of that. The outcome is going to be completely, to me, unpredictable. I try to predict these games, and now if that's not tough enough just with regular football games during the regular season, it becomes almost impossible in these bowl games because you don't even know who's going to be on the field.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Mark. And I think just to preface my comment earlier, I think I misspoke when I said I didn't really mean to say there was too many. I just said there's a lot, and I'm with you, and I completely with you, Mark. I can see both sides of it. Before we kind of get into the Oklahoma-Oregon thing, absolutely, the more football games, the better right now, especially as we start to go into this huge drought of after the national championship game. But I think I see it from both sides. Exactly from your point about the side, should we reward a 6-6 team? Should we reward a 5-7 Rutgers team that gets to play in a bowl game? But at the same time, it's for all of these kids that have had to go through what they've had to go through the last couple of years, I think it's a nice reward for those kids getting the opportunity to kind of a vacation type of situation, but still getting to go play the game you love. So yeah, I think it's interesting. I think this might be the first year that I can ever remember that every team that was bowl eligible got an opportunity to play in a bowl game. Heck, they literally created a bowl game on the fly just so the two 6-6 teams that weren't selected were able to play. So, there's some good and bad with it as well. So, but just, moving on to the Oklahoma and Oregon side, I'm with you. I have no idea what to expect from either team, really in this game. When you look at Oklahoma, they're coached by, they're coached by Bob Stoops, a guy that hasn't coached in, 5-6 years. Still, I think he made the comment today that it's sort of like riding a bike. You don't just forget because haven't done it, but at the same time, there's so many players that have been kind of moving in and out, not being around the practice. So many coaches that have been gone and now they're back just to coach in this bowl game for Oklahoma. Jamar Kane and Brian Odom are two that kind of come to mind that are coaching these kids for the final time. In this game, and so. And then really the same thing on the Oregon side. They're going through, something similar from a coaching perspective as well. So, not having their offensive coordinator there, Joe Moorhead, who has moved on, and certainly Oklahoma is the same way with Lincoln Riley. But I think it's, you look at some of these games, Mark, specifically. I think the most intriguing part of this specific game is these are two teams that had well into November, or at least first couple of weeks in November, had aspirations for playing for a national championship. And now, neither of them won their respective conference championships, and they're playing in a bowl game that's maybe, certainly a little bit of a lesser bowl game than both of these teams anticipated. So mindset is always, for me, very interesting, kind of coming into this situation. So I think, looking at this, you've got both teams that are losing quite a bit on the defensive side of the ball. Obviously, for Oregon, Kayvon Thibodeaux is the biggest one, the biggest name on both sides of the ball. That's gone, but they're missing a couple of guys in the secondary as well. And then Oklahoma with the four guys on the defensive side of the ball: Nick Benito, Perion Winfrey, Isaiah Thomas, and Brian Asamoah. All four of those guys have opted out, which it gives some opportunity for some of those young kids on both sides of the ball. But with that being said, some of these kids that really haven't played a lot, and then they're thrust into either a starting spot in a bowl game or getting a lot more minutes and a lot more snaps than they're accustomed to, is certainly an odd situation. But I think, in the past, you've seen an Oklahoma team that hasn't always been as fired up for a non-playoff, New Year's Six type of bowl game. But I think listening to some of these kids' comments this week, it seems to be very apparent that they are very, very focused on doing everything they can not to essentially ruin this for Bob Stoops, for lack of a better word. I think that a lot of them have a sense of pride and have a sense of ownership within the Oklahoma program to not do everything they can to not let him down, to get this win for him and what he's been able to do to kind of help stabilize this program over the last month.
Yeah, I've been looking through the various information that's online regarding who's going to be available and who's not. And for you Oregon fans watching us, so we're simulcasting on the Oregon channel as well. I'm looking at an article right now. I will give them credit for it in just a second when I find out exactly what I'm looking at. But the Ducks are severely shorthanded on defense, with 12 players from the preseason too deep unavailable for a variety of reasons. Kayvon Thibodeaux, Popo Amave, Mikhail Wright, who is a top player in the secondary. DJ James is as well. It's going to be a challenge for Oregon to both create pressure and stay stout in coverage. And then the four, once again, Jason, the four Oklahoma defenders who will not be playing.
So from the defensive line perspective, you've got Isaiah Thomas and Perion Winfrey, and then the Nick Benito, who was really kind of a rush in, and he played in coverage at the linebacker position as well from time to time. And then you have Brian Asamoah, who was the middle linebacker. So those are four guys that were very key to Oklahoma's defense. You can make an argument that those four are probably the four best players on Oklahoma's defense. So they've got some young kids that will that will be playing in this game. So I think Isaiah Coe is a guy to keep an eye on from a defensive tackle perspective. Reggie Grimes is a guy from a defensive end side that'll probably have a little bit more time frame. Marcus Stripling is a guy that will play in Nick Benito's instead of Nick Benito, and then probably more of a committee type approach. Danny Stutzman is a guy that'll probably get a little bit more playing time for Oklahoma at the linebacker, and then obviously I think they'll probably they might move Deshaun White over a little bit, so it'll be a little bit of a hodgepodge. But it's a good opportunity for some of these kids that will need to step up in prominent roles next year, and so having them, this could be a big catalyst for some of those kids to have great games, and then make a move in the spring and be a big part of this team in the 2022 season.
Dalton is asking us, what are your thoughts on Eric Gray's workload in this game? Do you see a 50-50 split between Brooks and Gray?
I think they'll do it very similarly to what they've done through the season. Mark and Dalton, I think, Kennedy Brooks has not indicated whether or not he's coming back. He's a senior in name, so he has the opportunity to come back. But I don't know. He even mentioned that he was going to address it immediately following the game. So I think that'll be interesting just to see. I don't know. I expect him to go just because he's been in Oklahoma for 3 years, and counting the COVID season. 3 years, all 3 years he's been over 1,000 yards rushing. I don't know what he could necessarily do to improve his draft stock by coming back another year, but he could possibly come back. So I think they'll probably run it very similarly to the way they've ran it in previously this year. Is give Kennedy Brooks the bulk of the carries, have Eric Gray be more of kind of the weapon out of the backfield, and I don't know. I see a lot of comments on here, and Marcus Major really never kind of got back into the flow for Oklahoma this year. After being out of the first part of the year due to academic and eligibility, but he's never really, got into the flow of the game a little bit. So it'll be interesting to see if he gets any carries, and I think more than anything, I'm interested to see what does the play calling, look like for Oklahoma in this game. Obviously it's still by and large Lincoln Riley's offense. Maybe a little bit of a tweak here and there, and just in terms of what they like to do. But I think that's going to be very intriguing to see. Number one, to some of the questions about who gets the most, most carries, how do they get split up, and then what does the play calling look like with someone outside of Riley calling those plays.
And we can also understand that not necessarily for the people that are watching right now that we have conversations with here in the live chat that are diehard college football fans and diehard Oklahoma fans. And today, welcome our Oregon folks. But those people that just want to watch some football and maybe they've heard a name or two, I think it, whether right or wrong, maintains a little credibility for a bowl matchup when the name players, the starting quarterbacks in particular, are in play. And Caleb Williams having, of course, the name that he has, being able to play and being in the game, as opposed to, contrast that with a New Year's Six game between Michigan State and Pitt, where Kenneth Walker, the marquee player for Michigan State, Kenny Pickett, the marquee player and quarterback for Pitt, not playing in the game. And those are the two players that by far draw the most attention for those two programs and made this matchup. They're not playing, and it tarnishes the game for, again, even more so for the fringe fan that just latch on to one or two players.
Yeah, it really does, Mark, and that's unfortunate for for a bowl game as big as that one to have your two major players on both sides of the ball. or for both teams, I should say, that aren't playing is super unfortunate. So yeah, I think for Oklahoma, you've got well, when you start on the Oklahoma side, obviously there's a lot of attention around Caleb Williams. And early on in this process, even a month ago, he had talked about he had planned on, you know, seeing everything through and really playing in the bowl game and then kind of making a decision after that. I think there's a lot of people, a lot of fans that have maybe not frustrated, but would have expected him to have made some sort of decision. I'm not one of those. I think from what you're seeing from him, on social media and what he been able to do over the last few weeks, I think it seems to point in a very positive direction for Oklahoma that he'll be back with this team next year. I mean, if no other reason, it was some things that I had heard was uh, if he wasn't coming back, it was almost a done deal that Dylan Gabriel would come to Oklahoma based on his past relationship that he had with Jeff Levy. And he he had made the decision to go to UCLA. So I think that was part of what people are reading into that. But as well, he was one of the best freshmen in the country. So him playing in this game gives this even more. And then on the Oregon side, you've got Anthony Brown, who has been up and down, but still a decent quarterback for Oregon. And then Travis Dye, one of the better running backs in the Pac-12 as well. I think he's still playing in this game, almost 1,200 yards rushing, 17 rushing touchdowns. So it'll be very interesting. Oregon is almost exclusively RPO in the way that they attack you on the offensive side of the ball. Average a little bit over 200 yards rushing per game. Oklahoma struggled a little bit down the stretch, stopping the run. So I think that'll be an interesting matchup to watch. Just all games are typically won at the line of scrimmage, but how does can Oklahoma make Anthony Brown be a passer as opposed to more of a runner, and he's not the when you think of some of the classic Oregon quarterbacks of the past, you probably wouldn't put him up there, but he's certainly formidable for them. So yeah, like I said, I think when news came out a couple of days ago that Oregon could be down, somewhere in the neighborhood of 30 scholarship players. I think the betting line for the game was around 4.5, and it jumped up all the way to 7. I think it's back down to around 6 or 6.5 now. But yeah, who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I think one of the biggest lines, and you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think probably not the biggest, but one of the biggest lines of this bowl season was last night, Mississippi State over Texas Tech, and that game wasn't even close on the opposite side of it. So, that you never know. You never know what to expect. You never know what the mindset is for either of these teams, and sometimes it's with interim coaches. I think in Oklahoma's situation, it's a really positive situation. And of course, I don't know as much on the Oregon side whether or not that's as positive a situation, or someone just really trying to kind of keep the hold the team together.
Yeah, Anthony Brown's a player that I saw quite a bit at Boston College, where he started for most of 3 seasons there. His best year was in 2018. He threw 20 touchdowns, 9 picks. He's a mobile quarterback and has, in a sense, I don't want to say regressed as a passer, but hasn't continued to develop as a passer and is almost a better runner than passer at this point. But he was pretty capable at Boston College. And I felt as though transitioning to Oregon, where he would have the support of better playmakers around him, that he would flourish at Oregon. Last season, he didn't play much. And then he comes into this season as the starting quarterback. Tyler Shook was the quarterback for most of last season, and then he transferred to Texas Tech. Brown was the choice for most of the bowl game against Iowa State in the Fiesta Bowl last year. Mm-hmm. And he had this, I know in having a number of Oregon media people on that they were not pleased with his play. I saw him the complete game against Ohio State, and he basically had the support of a really good running game and made the throws. They weren't difficult throws, but he made the throws and didn't make mistakes, did what he needed to do. And the game plan and the flow of the game and the support of the running game pretty much just shielded him to a certain extent to having to carry the load. And he did his job very well in that game. Now, I saw bits and pieces against the likes of Stanford. And of course, Oregon got blasted twice by Utah. This is a very curious thing to me that two teams that are roughly in the same vicinity, you would think, in terms of the caliber of teams, that they play in a game in which Oregon is gunning for a playoff spot. And Utah is out of the playoffs, but very much playing for a conference championship and trying to get to that conference championship game. And they annihilate Oregon. They wipe them off the field, whatever the final score was, 38-10, something in that range.
Yeah.
They played 2 to 3 weeks later in the conference championship game. And this is where I'm not going to say I lost respect for Mario Cristobal or think that he's not the coach that I thought he was, but I just thought it was a poor effort that you rarely see two teams that play a rematch where, again, they're very comparable in any way that you want to look at it, other than when they faced each other. And if anything, Oregon's considered a more talented team. That Utah, with all that motivation of playing for a Pac-12 championship and getting to a major bowl, a Rose Bowl game, and also avenging the embarrassment that you suffered a few weeks earlier, that Oregon pretty much got wiped out in a similar fashion. So maybe it's a bad matchup, but I just didn't take a whole lot away from that in regards to Mario Cristobal and his both game planning, but also his ability to inspire and rally his team to a cause and a purpose. But Anthony Brown, yeah, and watching them lose to a pretty bad Stanford team and in losing these two games to Utah, he misses a lot of throws. So they've been fairly disappointed with him, but he's experienced. He is experienced, and he's won a lot of games.
Yeah, these two teams, Mark, seem to be very eerily similar. I think not just necessarily from the aspect of what was going on from a coaching perspective, but I think, me and you have talked about Oregon at length, in our weekly, our weekly discussions that we've had. And you're right. I don't know that I've ever seen, surely I have, but nothing comes to mind, a situation where a team has played another team twice, and I mean, by and large, it's pretty much the exact same game both times.
Yeah. It was over at halftime, and the second half was just garbage, meaningless, on cruise control. Who knows how much Utah could have beaten them by, but both games were like 28-3 at half, over, done.
Yeah, it was like the first one was 38-7 final, the second was 38-10, and then the 38-10 game, to your point, Oregon scored very, very late to make it look. And I think, when I say that these two teams are eerily similar, when you look at Oklahoma this year, a lot's been made of, they had a lot of close games against a lot of mediocre teams, and the very much the same thing could be said for Oregon. They had that feather in their cap with the Ohio State win, but to your point, they relied much more on the offensive line, and C.J. Verdell and Travis Dye both in that game to win that game. So I don't think there's anything that kind of screams off of the tape or after looking at Oregon saying that they're incredibly more talented or incredibly more explosive than Oklahoma is. So, there's some comments around here that Utah was much more physical than Oregon was. So I think that's really kind of the key. I think for Oklahoma in this game, are they able to, are they able to out physical Oregon at the line of scrimmage at the level of attack there, and if they are, I think Oklahoma has the talent and has the ability to duplicate what Utah did. However, like I said, you never know. Oklahoma's offensive line hasn't been anywhere near as good as a lot of us, including myself, would have expected this year. So I don't know at this point how capable they are of out physicaling Oregon, at least on the offensive side of the ball. So, but I think and I'm interested. We talked a little bit about this, in regards to how Florida went from where they were at last year in the Cotton Bowl to how that um, how that ended for this program here in the bowl season this year. But I can make an argument that a bowl win is almost critical, for some of these programs to, and it gives them a really big boost into next season, whether it be the late period recruiting, whether it be the extra practices that some of these kids get in the bowl season, and it gives them really gives them a shot in the arm in terms of what the next season looks like. But I've also seen situations where it doesn't matter even in the least. They have a team maybe has a little bit of a less than expectation type of year, and then they cap it off with a bowl win, and then doesn't do anything for them the next year. They're just as maybe just as underwhelming, or maybe even more the next year. So it's hard to. I mean, I think it kind of has to do with the leadership and who you have at the top, with either at a player or a coaching staff perspective. But interested in your thoughts of what do you feel like that does to these programs with maybe a big win like Oklahoma had last year? Obviously, it didn't do much for them, in terms of where they ended this year, which I think a lot of us thought that was going to be a huge catalyst for Oklahoma here in 2021.
Yes, you mentioned we talked about the other side of the coin that Oklahoma was looking at the Cotton Bowl and the disaster that became Florida football. And I don't know if that attitude that Dan Mullen and therefore his program took toward the Cotton Bowl last year and the embarrassment that it became, I don't know if that lingered into the off season and continued to catapult that program in a bad place, or that was just an isolated event that was just indicative of him mismanaging the entire program, and that was just the next one in line, and it really had no or little impact. I think it had some impact. I think everything has some impact.
Yeah.
I do think that these bowl games have less impact for a couple reasons. One is that they're just perceived to be less important than they used to be. But also, when you think about it, if the roster turnover is greater than it's ever been, then there are less players that were with that previous team from the previous season than ever before, because of transfers and then just the normal churn of seniors moving on and incoming freshmen. But with the transfer portal being what it is, there are less players that are leftovers from the previous team, regardless of the experience, good or bad. So I would think that there would be less impact because of that as well. Yeah, I was also going to take it in the direction of, you know, for somebody that takes some pride in predicting football games correctly, this bowl season has been just dart throwing. I'm just like flipping a coin. I don't really know, just throwing darts at the wall. So in this particular game, for some reason, and I'll probably be completely wrong, but the more I think about it, the more it kind of sinks in. It just seems as though, for as dysfunctional as both situations are to a certain extent, it just seems that the presence of Bob Stoops and having a dynamic quarterback, and I think just flat out having a better team, that Oklahoma might, and again, this may come back to bite me, but I think they might blow Oregon off the field.
It does kind of feel that way, even from my perspective, Mark. It feels like, and I think the difference is what you mentioned. I think what Bob has brought to this team over the last month, we've talked about it a lot, but I don't think it can be understated, just from the fact of how he was able to the way Riley left Oklahoma, and the way that now it's kind of come out in the media that his people were in discussions with USC as early as late September, early October. I think the players probably didn't realize it at that point, but over the last 2 or 3 weeks of the regular season, they realized that something was probably going on, and I think because I think the coaching staff realized that as well. So knowing that Riley didn't have maybe as much allegiance to them, didn't really care about the players as much as maybe some others have. I think what Bob has brought to this team overall over the last month, I think, is going to be invaluable and really kind of bringing them together. And I think it's a big catalyst with what Venables is going to bring to them, just because they are very similar in the way they think, and they're very similar in their approach. I think Venables is taking an almost carbon copy approach to what Bob took to Oklahoma in 1999, when in him taking this job, in terms of just how he's bringing on a staff, how he's recruiting, how he's treating the players. And I think what's been missing over the last probably 5 or 6 years is really that personal relationship that Riley had admittedly, I think, just that's not what he wanted to do. Like, he was about ball, and he was about the X's and the O's, and that's in winning football games, and not as much about caring about the player. So I think this last month has shown that these kids will be all in. I would be shocked if Oklahoma is not, at least at the very least, not ready, ready to play, not motivated to play in this game. So, given that fact, I would certainly still give Oklahoma an advantage. I don't, certainly don't know about the blowout, but it just depends on. I mean, I think it just depends on both the makeup for Oregon and how many people are actually out. I don't know that we won't necessarily know this until the game kicks off, but how many people do they have out specifically on the defensive side of the ball will be, I think, will be big. But I think all signs seem at this point right now seems to point to Oklahoma being in a really good position to get this win. And I think, like I said, I think the kids have more of a. I think they have more pride about the University of Oklahoma maybe than they have in quite some time, that Bob has brought forward, and absolutely Brent has mentioned that several times, that he wants to be a coach that really cares deeply about his staff, really cares deeply about his players. Obviously, he's going to push them. He's probably going to be a bigger disciplinarian, a bigger kind of in your face, old school type of football coach than Riley was. But at the same time, I think he and Coach Stoops kind of take that from him, and a guy that really just cares about his players and cares about his kids.
Yeah, Bob Stoops, I'll use this word, was pretty masterful at being able to lead and direct a major football power and then still maintain some balance to life for himself and his coaches. And that's very difficult to do. And he was able to do it. And I know some Oklahoma fans, because of our interactions on here and elsewhere, I understand that they weren't completely satisfied with his level of winning, but it wasn't that far off of the very best in college football. So if you don't have respect for what he accomplished on the field, you have to have respect for him as a man and as a leader. He's been upstanding, and I saw some article. I didn't read the article, but I just saw some type of headline somewhere about raising a second statue to Bob Stoops because of all that he's done and what he represents.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's, he was very, I think the synopsis around Bob was he was always very, very loved and very adored by the fan base. I mean, for nothing else, he brought Oklahoma another national championship in 2000. But I think where Oklahoma fans may have soured on him a bit, and is just his inability later in his career to get over the hump and get that second national championship. And he had several. He put Oklahoma in several opportunities. Throughout the years. Most notably against LSU, against USC, and then against Florida again. So 3 other opportunities, and then had Oklahoma in the playoffs. One of his final season. Maybe that wasn't his last season. I'm trying to remember, but still towards the end of his career at Oklahoma. So, but yeah, no, I think you're right. I think it gets to, it's very, very much the same way that people feel about Venables. I think a lot of Oklahoma fans are very a lot of Oklahoma fans are very unrealistic in their expectations. I think it was almost a situation where you don't value what you had until it's gone. I think when you look at both, both Bob and Brent, when you have, Riley won for the most part with Bob's players, right? So Bob got those kids to campus, and so I think Riley kept the wheels on the bus from that perspective. But then when you look at the defensive side of the ball, it's been well chronicled here and basically everywhere else in the state of Oklahoma how there's been a downward trajectory on Oklahoma defensively. And I think Oklahoma was, in the mid 2000s and before Venables left to go to Clemson. I think a top 30 defense wasn't good enough at Oklahoma. They were used to, in the early 2000s, 2000 through 2003, 2004, being top 10, top 15, and when they were in top 30, that wasn't good enough. I think almost every Oklahoma fan would do cartwheels for a top 30 defense right now, consistently year in and year out. So, I think if nothing else, through all this transition, I think a lot of Oklahoma fans and just the people have maybe learned to appreciate things. And now I think Venables was always the top choice, I think, among Oklahoma fans, but I think he has even more so, proved that with exactly how he has handled the media and a lot of the things that he said about Oklahoma being a place that he wants people that want to be at Oklahoma, and I think that's not necessarily been the case. So yeah, like I think when you think about it, I think it's these kids. Some of these kids still remember Bob. I mean, some of these kids were recruited by Bob, years ago, especially the seniors and the kids that have been here for 4 or 5 years. They remember Bob. He's still been part of the program. Even last year, he got pulled into coach a little bit. Again, Oklahoma was in the week against Baylor when they were out over half of their coaching staff due to COVID protocols last year, and so he still has been involved obviously at a higher level than he is right now. But yeah, I mean, I think win, lose, or draw, I think it's going to be just kind of cool to see him back on the sidelines for one game and just see what he's able to bring to this team one last time.
Absolutely. Oklahoma, Oregon, keep your fingers crossed. We saw a cancellation of UCLA and North Carolina stage just hours before kickoff last night. We also saw a situation with Mississippi State and Texas Tech where Mississippi State had something in the range of 10 players ruled ineligible, inactive just before kickoff, practically pulled off the field, not to that extent, but inactive and ruled ineligible to play in the game because of COVID protocols. So it is a touch and go situation for each and every one of these bowl games, which kick off here in the next 45 minutes or so. With, I believe, Virginia Tech and Maryland. We've got 3 games today in Oklahoma and Oregon, the third of the 3 at the Alamo Bowl, with the Big 12 taking on the Pac-12. Would invite you to head on over to Last Word on College Football to check out Jason's work and the rest of this crew at Last Word on College Football as they take you through the bowl season, transfers, National Signing Day in the aftermath, and then headed toward February, of course. The national championship game and the playoffs, of course, are this Friday, and New Year's Day bowl games with the Rose, the Peach, and the rest of the New Year's 6 being played. All right, Jason, are you going to be up late night tonight for postgame?
Yeah, we'll be here late if you guys dare. It'll probably be around, I'm guessing it'll probably be around midnight local time when the game is finally over, because it's an 8:15 kick, and the halftime shows are a little bit longer for bowl games. So probably around midnight we'll get it cranking for you guys that are interested for one last time for this 2021 season.
There we go, folks. You can talk about the Alamo Bowl, but also look forward to what you saw and projecting that out toward 2022 and what Oklahoma football is going to look like this spring and beyond into next fall with Jason after the ball game tonight right here at the Voice of College Football on our OU channel. So Oregon fans, we appreciate you being here on the simulcast. OU fans, we'll be back here next Wednesday at 11:30 a.m. Central Time. And of course, join Jason late tonight after the ball game to talk OU football. You just don't need to talk about the Alamo Bowl because we know there are varying levels of interest about the outcome of tonight's game. But of course, you guys are going to take what you saw and again project it toward 2022. Jason, if I don't get to talk to you, Happy New Year.
Same to you.
And Jason makes this show go, so we appreciate Jason and all his hard work and expertise. So, Jason, enjoy the game tonight. Hopefully we get a good one.
All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.